Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight, wherever you are right now, whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment. I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I never should have moved into that house. At the time, it seemed like the right decision. A fresh start in a quiet town, away from the noise and chaos of my old life. My divorce had drained me emotionally, and I needed a place where I could breathe, where no one knew my name. So when I found the listing for the old house on Sycamore Street, it felt like fate. Cheap rent, fully furnished, and only a short drive from town. The real estate agent barely spoke about the house's history, but something about the way she avoided eye contact made me uneasy. She handed me the keys with a tight smile and said, "It's an old place, so expect some creaks and groans at night." I should have asked more questions. The first time I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and something else I couldn't place. Something damp and stale, like old wood left out in the rain. The floorboards moaned under my weight as I walked from room to room. The living room had a stone fireplace. The kitchen was small but functional, and the bedroom upstairs had a heavy wooden wardrobe that looked like it belonged in a museum. At first, I chalked up the house's quirks to age. The pipes rattled when I turned on the water, and the wind howled through the gaps in the window panes. At night, I'd hear the occasional creak, but I told myself it was normal. Old houses make noise. Then on my third night, I met Mr. Holloway. He lived next door, an elderly man with sharp blue eyes and a face like crumpled paper. I had been taking out the trash when he appeared at the edge of his yard, watching me. "You moved in, huh?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. Trying to get settled, he nodded but didn't return the smile. "Hope you don't scare easy." I frowned. "Why?" Holloway studied me for a long moment before saying, "Last guy ran out in the middle of the night, left everything behind, never came back." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "What happened?" The old man shrugged, said he heard things, saw things, the kind of things that don't let you sleep at night. I forced a laugh, probably just an overactive imagination. Holloway's expression didn't change. "Yeah, probably." Then he turned and walked back inside his house, leaving me standing in the cold, staring up at the dark windows of my new home. That night, the noises started. At first, it was faint, just the sound of footsteps in the hall outside my bedroom. I told myself it was the house settling, but as the nights passed, the footsteps grew louder, heavier, and sometimes they stopped right outside my door. I stopped sleeping. The longer I stayed, the worse it got. The air inside the house felt thick, like it was pressing against my skin. Shadows seemed darker than they should have been, stretching long and unnatural across the walls. And then there was the wardrobe. I could have sworn I closed it every night before bed. But in the morning, the door would always be open, just a crack, like something was watching me from inside. I started locking my bedroom door at night. It wasn't something I had ever done before, but after a week of hearing those slow, deliberate footsteps outside my room, I needed to do something, anything, to feel in control. The first night I locked it, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining for any sound. Hours pass in silence. No footsteps. No creaking floorboards. Just the wind outside and the rhythmic ticking of the old clock in the hall. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it all. But then, around 3 a.m., I heard it. A soft click. My breath caught in my throat. It was the unmistakable sound of my bedroom doorknob turning. Slowly, I bolted upright, my heart slamming against my ribs. The knob rattled, like someone was testing the lock. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the door. The knob stopped moving. I sat frozen, barely breathing, waiting for anything to happen. But there was nothing, just silence. Minutes passed. Then, just as I began to lower my phone, a long, slow creak echoed through the room. I turned toward the wardrobe. The door was open again, wider this time. A cold, heavy dread settled over me. My throat felt dry, my skin prickling as I stared at the dark gap between the doors. The house was old, yes. The floors shifted. Doors sometimes didn't latch properly, but that didn't explain why the wardrobe kept opening on its own. I thought about Holloway's warning. Last guy ran out in the middle of the night, left everything behind, never came back. I wanted to get up and slam the wardrobe shut, but my body refused to move. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just beyond the threshold of darkness, waiting, watching. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to work feeling like a zombie. I could barely focus. My hands shook when I tried to drink my coffee. My co-workers noticed, but I brushed off their concern with a tired laugh. Just not sleeping well, I said. That was an understatement. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. Heavier. The air had a damp, musty smell, like something rotting beneath the floorboards. I checked the wardrobe first thing. It was open, of course. I slammed it shut, locked it with the old key I found in one of the drawers. But that night, at exactly 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, deliberate tapping, coming from inside the wardrobe. 3 knocks. Slow. Measured. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just lay there, my heart pounding in my ears, staring at the wardrobe door. Then, from the other side, I heard it. A whisper. My name. I was out of bed before I could think, fumbling for the light switch. The second the room lit up, the knocking stopped. The wardrobe door was still closed, the key still in place. But I knew something was in there, and it knew my name. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wardrobe, waiting for anything to happen. But after that whisper, there was only silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against my skin like damp cloth. When the sun finally rose, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Maybe it had been a dream. Maybe my sleep-deprived brain was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Something was inside that wardrobe, and it was waiting. Hashtag, a desperate search for answers. I spent the morning researching the house. I scoured old newspaper archives, town records, anything I could find, but there was almost nothing. No deaths, no crimes, no urban legends. Just a handful of old property transfers. Then I found a name, Edwin Moore. He was listed as the original owner of the house, dating back nearly a century. A reclusive man, never married, no children. The town records mentioned nothing of his death. It was as if he had simply vanished. But when I searched his name separately, I found something. A local blog buried in the depths of the internet. The vanishing of Edwin Moore. My hands trembled as I clicked on the link. The blog post was old, nearly 2 decades old, written by someone who had lived in the town their whole life. It detailed how Edwin Moore had been obsessed with the occult, spending years conducting strange rituals inside the house. Neighbors heard him chanting at night, saw flickering candlelight through the windows at odd hours. Then one evening in 1932, he was simply gone. No body, no explanation, just gone. According to the blog, rumors swirled that he had opened a door to something he shouldn't have, that whatever he had been calling had finally answered, and that it never left. I felt sick. I closed my laptop and glanced around the room, my pulse hammering in my ears. The house was too quiet. The air felt too still. Then, from upstairs, I heard the wardrobe door creak open. Hashtag the shadow in the wardrobe. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to grab my keys and drive as far away as possible. But I had to see. I forced myself up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. My bedroom door was open, just as I had left it. But the wardrobe, it wasn't just open, it was wide open. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood, and something else, something acrid, like burnt hair. I swallowed hard. Then, as I stepped closer, I saw it. A shadow, not cast by the light, not belonging to anything in the room. It was inside the wardrobe, stretching long and impossibly deep into the darkness. And it moved, a slow, slithering movement, as if it were shifting, turning toward me. A breath of cold air brushed against my face. Then a voice, low, whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled back, slamming into the wall. My vision blurred with terror, my legs barely able to hold me up. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow was gone. The wardrobe stood empty. But I knew better. It wasn't gone. It was waiting. I didn't go back into my bedroom that night. After seeing that shadow, hearing that voice, I couldn't. I grabbed my blanket, my pillow, and slept, or at least tried to, on the couch downstairs. Every sound made me jump. Every creak in the old wooden floor sent a fresh wave of dread through my chest. At some point, exhaustion won over fear, and I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. But it didn't last long, because at exactly 3 a.m., I woke up gasping. The house was silent, but something had startled me awake. A dream? A sound? I wasn't sure. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something that turned my stomach to ice. The staircase. There was a shadow at the top, still, motionless, watching. I couldn't see a shape, couldn't make out any details. Just a dark figure standing there, barely distinguishable from the shadows around it. I stopped breathing. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I just lay there, gripping the blanket so hard my knuckles ached. Then, just when I thought my heart would explode from my chest, it moved, slowly, silently, descending one step at a time. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to turn away, to shut my eyes and pretend I wasn't seeing what I was seeing, but I couldn't. I was trapped in that moment, frozen in fear. The shadow took another step, then another. The air grew colder, my breath coming out in shallow gasps. It wasn't just walking down the stairs. It was walking toward me. I clenched my fist, willing myself to move, to do something, but just as I finally managed to shift, to jerk my body upright, the shadow vanished. Just like that. 1 second, it was there, standing on the last step. The next, the space was empty. But I knew what I saw. Something was in this house with me, and it wanted me to know it. Hashtag, it knows you're here. I didn't sleep after that. I sat upright on the couch, clutching my phone like a lifeline, waiting for the sun to rise. As soon as it did, I left. I didn't have a plan, didn't even grab my keys. Just walked out the front door and kept going, my breath still shaky in my chest. I needed to clear my head. That's how I ended up at the coffee shop down the street. I ordered something hot just to have something to hold, to ground myself. But my hands were still trembling when I sat down in the corner. I barely noticed when someone slid into the seat across from me. "Haven't seen you around much," a voice said. I looked up and recognized him immediately. Holloway, the neighbor who had warned me on my first day, the one who had mentioned the last tenant running out in terror. I stared at him for a second, trying to decide if I should say anything. Then I just blurted it out. There's something in that house. His expression didn't change. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he just sighed, stirring his coffee with slow, deliberate motions. "Yeah," he said. "I know." That sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. "How long?" I asked. Holloway's gaze drifted toward the window. "A long time," he muttered. "Too long." He paused, then leaned in slightly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It knows you're there now." My skin prickled. "What do you mean?" I asked. Holloway's eyes flicked back to mine. There was something unreadable in his expression. "You should leave," he said, "before it gets worse." I swallowed hard. "Worse." He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. A photograph. He slid it across the table. I picked it up, and the moment my eyes landed on the image, my breath caught in my throat. It was an old, faded black and white photo. A man standing in the doorway of my house. But it wasn't the man that made my stomach turn. It was the shadow behind him, twisted, looming, watching, and it was the same one I had seen on the stairs. I stared at the photograph, my fingers tightening around the edges. The shadow in the picture was unmistakable. It was the same one I had seen watching me from the stairs last night. "How old is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Holloway exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "That picture was taken in 1957. My stomach clenched. That didn't make sense. The figure in the image, its shape, its presence, it wasn't some trick of the light. It was real. And if it had been there back then, that meant it's always been there, hasn't it?" I muttered. Holloway nodded. "The house, it doesn't let go of things easily." A cold chill ran through me. I forced myself to look at the picture again. The man in the doorway. He looked normal. Just an average guy in a collared shirt and slacks, staring blankly at the camera. But the shadow behind him, it wasn't just behind him. It was looming over him, stretching unnaturally along the walls and ceiling, like something seeping into the house itself. What happened to him? I asked, my throat dry. Holloway's jaw tightened. He disappeared. My breath caught. "Vanished without a trace," he continued. "One day, he just wasn't there anymore. No signs of struggle. No note. Just gone." I swallowed hard, my pulse thudding in my ears. "I need to get out of that house," I muttered. Holloway's expression darkened. "You should have left the first night you heard it." I shoved the photograph back toward him. "What the hell is it?" He hesitated, drumming his fingers against the table. Then in a low voice he said, "The original owner of that house, Nathaniel Blackwood, was obsessed with the occult. People say he was trying to summon something. Something old." I shuddered. "Did he succeed?" Holloway exhaled sharply. "Depends on what you mean by succeed. No one's seen him since 1932. Some say he disappeared into the walls of that house. Others say he became part of it." He shook his head. "But whatever he called, it never left." I felt dizzy. This was insane. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. And yet, I had seen it. I had felt it. And it was watching me. I pushed my chair back abruptly. "I need to go." Holloway grabbed my wrist before I could stand. His grip was firm, his expression serious. "Listen to me. If you're staying there even one more night, don't go into the basement." I froze. I hadn't even thought about the basement. "What's down there?" I whispered. Holloway let go of my wrist, his voice dropping lower. "The door." I didn't ask any more questions. I left the coffee shop. The photograph burned into my memory and walked back to the house with a heavy weight in my chest. I should have packed a bag and left. I should have never stepped foot inside again. But something in me, some horrible, gnawing curiosity, was already thinking about the basement and the door waiting for me in the dark. I barely slept. Even with every light on, the house felt like it was closing in around me. The floors creaked as though someone were pacing just outside my door. The air was thick with a musty, damp scent that hadn't been there before. And worse, much worse, was the whispering. It started as a faint murmur, just at the edge of hearing, like wind slipping through cracks in the walls. But as the night deepened, it became clearer. Words I couldn't quite make out. Voices that were too close. I lay stiff in bed, gripping the covers, forcing myself to stay still. I kept telling myself it was the old pipes, the wood settling, anything but what I knew it really was. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., something knocked from beneath the floor. I stopped breathing. The knock came again. Asterisk, asterisk, slow, deliberate, asterisk, asterisk, like someone was tapping from underneath the house. The basement. My body screamed at me to stay in bed, to pretend I hadn't heard it. But my mind was already spiraling, already picturing the door Holloway had warned me about. I needed to see it. I had to know. Swallowing the fear clawing up my throat, I swung my legs over the bed and stood. The wooden boards groaned under my weight. My breath felt too loud in the silence. I crept down the hallway, past the darkened staircase, to the small door at the end of the hall, the entrance to the basement. My fingers trembled as I turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow wooden staircase spiraling down into blackness. A cold draft wafted up from below, thick with the scent of damp earth and something rotting. I hesitated. Don't go into the basement. But I had already come this far. Heart pounding, I stepped onto the first stair, then the second. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. The deeper I went, the colder it became. The walls felt tighter, as if the house itself were pressing in. Then I saw it. At the far end of the basement, half hidden by shadows, was a door. Not just any door. It was old, wrong, made of wood that looked too dark, like it had been burned but never fully consumed. Strange symbols had been carved into the surface, deep and jagged, as though someone had gouged them in with shaking hands. The whispering grew louder. I took a step forward. Something shifted in the shadows beyond the door. I stopped cold. My breath turned to ice in my lungs. And then the doorknob twisted. I bolted. I don't remember running up the stairs. Don't remember slamming the door shut behind me. All I know is that by the time I reached my bedroom, I was shaking so hard I could barely lock the door. The whispering didn't stop. It followed me up the stairs. And just before dawn, as I finally drifted into a restless, uneasy sleep, I heard the basement door creak open. I woke to silence, the kind that wasn't right. No birds outside. No distant hum of passing cars, just a heavy, suffocating absence of sound, as if the world had stopped breathing. I sat up slowly, my body aching, my mouth dry. My eyes darted to the bedroom door, half expecting it to be open, but it was still locked, still closed. For now, the events of last night slammed into me all at once. The basement, the door, the whispering, the way the knob had twisted on its own, and worst of all, I had heard it open. My stomach twisted. I needed to get out. I threw the covers back and stumbled out of bed, barely pausing to grab my phone. My entire body screamed for me to run, to not waste another second in this cursed house. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, I froze. The basement door was wide open. A sharp, icy dread crawled up my spine. I could see the staircase descending into the darkness below, the air thick with that rotting, damp smell. And then a footprint, dark, wet, pressed into the wooden floor just outside the basement door. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The footprint was too large, the shape of it wrong. Toes that looked too long, the arch too narrow, like something not quite human had stepped out of the basement and walked into my home. I followed the trail with my eyes. More footprints, leading down the hall, leading toward my bedroom. A cold sweat broke over my skin. Something had been in my room. I felt it last night. The whispering, the way the air had felt thick, pressing down on me. It had been watching me. I swallowed back the bile, rising in my throat, and backed away. I couldn't stay here. I turned, grabbing for my keys on the hallway table. My fingers barely brushed them when a deep, slow creak echoed from inside my room. I went rigid. Something was in there. The silence stretched, suffocating. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then a shuffle, like bare feet dragging over the wooden floor. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. I tore through the front door, into the blinding morning light. The air outside was crisp, normal. So painfully normal that for a second, I thought I had imagined everything, until I looked back and saw the figure standing at my bedroom window. Not moving, not blinking, just watching me. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure didn't move, but its hand pressed against the glass, and it was too long. I didn't stop running. The morning air burned in my lungs, but I kept going, my feet slamming against the pavement as I put as much distance as I could between myself and that thing in my window. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to be anywhere else. My hands trembled as I dug my phone out of my pocket, barely able to unlock the screen. Who do I call? The police? A neighbor? A priest? Asterisk, asterisk. Just then, I spotted a familiar figure across the street. Holloway. He was standing in his driveway, holding a steaming mug, watching me with his usual weary expression, like he'd been expecting this. I ran to him. Holloway, please, you have to help me. He took one slow sip of his coffee. Saw you running. Figured it was about time. I blinked, my breath still coming in frantic bursts. What the hell does that mean? He sighed and set his mug down on the hood of his truck. Come inside. I hesitated. Every nerve in my body told me not to go anywhere near another house. But something in Holloway's expression made me follow him. His place was small, cluttered, smelling of old wood and cigarettes. The kind of house that had been lived in for decades, unlike mine. Asterisk, asterisk, which had been waiting asterisk, asterisk. He gestured for me to sit. I stayed standing. You saw it, didn't you? He asked. My stomach clenched. You knew something was in that house. I tried to warn you. He sighed. Told you not to go in that basement. I swallowed. What the hell is down there, Holloway? He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. About 30 years ago, an old man named Elijah Crow lived in that house. Kept to himself. Never spoke to anyone. People thought he was just a recluse. But one night, a kid broke into his basement on a dare. A chill ran through me, and Holloway's expression darkened, and the kid came running out 5 minutes later, screaming, said something was in there with him, something with a voice that sounded like his own, asterisk, asterisk. My blood went cold. They found Elijah Crow the next day. Holloway continued, dead in that basement, but not just dead. Asterisk, asterisk, withered, asterisk, asterisk, like something had drained the life right out of him. I gripped the table. And you're telling me I just spent a week living in his damn house? Holloway met my eyes. I'm telling you, kid, it never left. My stomach turned. What never left? He exhaled. Elijah was into some things occult shit. Neighbor said he used to hold rituals down there. Said he was trying to contact something. My breath hitched. Contact what? Holloway shook his head. Nobody knows. But whatever he brought through, it stayed. A heavy silence stretched between us. My skin crawled. Then I whispered. It was in my room last night. Holloway's jaw tightened. Then you need to leave. Now, asterisk, asterisk. A shiver ran through me. You don't have to tell me twice. I turned for the door, my body buzzing with urgency. But as I reached for the handle, I caught something from the corner of my eye. Holloway's window. Something was outside, watching us. A dark shape, standing just beyond the glass. Tall, still, and grinning. I couldn't move. The figure outside Holloway's window was still, barely more than a shadow against the early morning light. But I could feel its eyes on me. Empty, hungry, knowing asterisk asterisk. And that grin, too wide, too wrong. Holloway saw it too, his entire body tensed, his hand clenching into a fist on the table. He had seen this before. Then, without a word, he moved, faster than I expected for a man his age. He grabbed something from a nearby drawer, a rusted shotgun, worn but loaded. He cocked it, eyes never leaving the window. "Stay behind me," he muttered. My breath came in sharp gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What the hell is it?" Holloway didn't answer. He just stepped closer to the window. The figure outside didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't move at all. And that was worse, because nothing human stands that still. Then, just as Holloway raised a gun, the thing snapped its head toward me. I choked on my breath. Not turned. Snapped like its neck was a loose hinge, a broken doll's head twisting at the wrong angle. Holloway swore under his breath. "Get away from the window. Now." I backed up. The thing still didn't move. But then, the glass cracked. A thin, spidery fracture spread across the surface, slow and deliberate, like ice breaking beneath pressure. But the thing outside never lifted a hand. It was smiling, and then it opened its mouth. A deep, guttural sound. Asterisk, asterisk, not a voice. Not even a growl, asterisk, asterisk. Poured through the broken window, like something scraping against hollow bone. Like it was laughing. I ran. Holloway fired. The gunshot roared through the small house, but I didn't stop to see if he hit it. I bolted for the front door, flinging it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The morning outside felt wrong, like the sunlight didn't quite reach the ground, like the shadows stretched too far. I didn't care. I sprinted across the yard. Behind me, Holloway cursed again. Then another gunshot rang out. Then silence. I turned. Holloway stood in the doorway, the shotgun still raised, his chest heaving. The window was shattered now, shards of glass littering the floor. But the thing? Gone. No footprints. No sign it had ever been there. But the air was still thick, still charged with something heavy, something waiting. Holloway lowered the gun. "You're out of time, kid. You need to leave this town." I swallowed hard. What the hell was that thing? He looked at me, his face pale. Something Elijah Crow brought into this world. And if it's showing itself to you now, it means you're marked. A chill slid down my spine. Marked. Holloway's grip on the shotgun tightened. It's not just haunting that house anymore. It's following you. I felt the ground shift beneath me, like the world had tilted just slightly off balance. I wasn't just dealing with a haunted house. I was being hunted. I stood there, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The weight of Holloway's words pressed down on me like a vice. "It's following you." I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, that this was just some awful hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. But I couldn't. I had seen it, felt it, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I was no longer safe. Holloway ran a hand over his face, looking older than he had a moment ago. "Listen to me," he said. "I don't know how much time you have before it shows up again, but you need to leave. Right now. Drive as far as you can. Don't stop until you're somewhere crowded." I swallowed hard. And then what? He didn't answer, because he didn't know. I looked past him at the shattered window, at the place where the thing had been standing. The street outside was empty now, but the air still felt thick, like something unseen was watching, waiting. I couldn't stay here. Without another word, I turned and sprinted toward my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them twice before managing to shove one into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, backing out so fast my tires screeched against the pavement. As I turned onto the main road, I stole one last glance in the rear-view mirror. Holloway was still standing in his doorway, shotgun in hand. His expression was grim, like he knew something I didn't. And then I saw it, a shadow, not in the street, not in the yards, but in my back seat. A dark, grinning shape, and it was waiting for me. My blood turned to ice. I slammed on the brakes, but the second I did, the car jerked violently, like something had grabbed hold of it from underneath. The steering wheel wrenched in my hands, pulling to the right, and for a heart-stopping moment, I lost control. The car veered toward a ditch. I barely managed to correct it, my heart pounding in my throat, and then the presence was gone. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing, no shadow, no grin, just empty seats. But I wasn't stupid. It was still there. It was just letting me know it could reach me. I pressed the gas pedal down hard. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't driving home. I wasn't going back to that house. Not ever. But somehow, even as I sped away, even as the town faded into the distance behind me, I knew the truth. I had left the house, but I hadn't left it, and I never would. I drove for hours without stopping. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a dark ribbon cutting through the vast emptiness of the countryside. My hands were locked on the wheel, my knuckles pale from the grip. The farther I got from that house, from that town, the better I should have felt. But I didn't. The air in the car felt heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Every so often, I caught glimpses of something in the rear-view mirror, just for a second, just long enough to send a bolt of ice through my veins. But every time I turned, there was nothing. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. At some point, exhaustion caught up to me. My eyelids drooped, my vision blurred. The adrenaline that had been keeping me going finally began to fade, leaving only a deep, bone-weary fatigue in its place. I needed to stop. Up ahead, I spotted the glowing neon sign of a roadside motel, its flickering letters buzzing weakly in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was far from that house, far from Holloway, far from everything I had left behind. I pulled into the lot, my tires crunching on gravel. The place looked nearly abandoned, just a few cars scattered here and there, their owners already tucked away inside for the night. I stepped out, stretching my aching limbs, but the unease didn't leave me. I glanced around. The night was silent. The only sound the distant hum of crickets and the faint buzz of the motel's flickering sign. I hurried inside. The lobby was small and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee, and something musty beneath it. The clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a cigarette dangling from his lips, barely looked up as I approached. "One night," I said, my voice hoarse. He grunted, sliding a key across the counter. "Room 6, end of the hall." I nodded, snatched up the key, and headed down the narrow corridor. The walls were a sickly yellow, the carpet threadbare and stained. The light overhead flickered as I passed beneath it. I reached my room, shoved the key into the lock, and pushed the door open. The room was small, just a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a television so old I doubted it even worked. The air was stale, as if no one had stayed here in a long time. I closed the door behind me and locked it. Then, for good measure, I shoved a chair under the handle. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I sank onto the bed, my muscles aching, my body screaming for rest. But as I sat there in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Something was wrong. I didn't know what it was at first, just a creeping sensation, like being watched. And then I saw it. The mirror. It was an old, rectangular thing hanging on the wall across from the bed. its glass warped with age. At first, it was just my reflection staring back at me, exhausted, disheveled, hollow-eyed. But then, it blinked. I didn't. My stomach dropped. Slowly, my reflection tilted its head just slightly, just enough for me to notice. My actual head stayed perfectly still. A cold, electric terror flooded my veins. And then, without moving my lips, without making a sound, the reflection smiled. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The reflection just stood there, grinning, eyes locked onto mine. Then, slowly, painfully, it raised a hand and knocked. Not on the glass, not on the wall, on the inside of the mirror. I ran. I grabbed my bag, wrenched the door open, and sprinted out of the room, my pulse hammering in my ears. The hallway was empty, the motel silent except for the low hum of a vending machine down the hall. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car. The door slammed shut behind me, the engine roaring to life. I didn't look at the motel. I didn't look in the mirror. I just drove. And as I tore down the empty highway, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached, one thought pulsed over and over in my mind. It followed me. It's still with me. And no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, it always would be. I don't remember how long I drove. The road stretched endlessly before me, swallowed by the night. The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, but beyond that, the world felt empty, vast, unknowable. I kept checking the rearview mirror. I couldn't help it. Every time I did, my pulse spiked, expecting to see something sitting in the back seat, a shadow, a grin. But there was nothing, at least nothing I could see. I passed through towns I didn't recognize, nameless places with flickering streetlights and silent gas stations. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to keep moving. But eventually, I ran out of road. It was almost dawn when I hit the outskirts of a small, nameless town. I hadn't planned on stopping, but my body had other ideas. My vision blurred. My hands trembled on the wheel. I had pushed myself too far, and I knew it. I pulled into a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner. The neon sign buzzed weakly, the word open barely visible through the grime. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the wheel, listening to the engine's soft hum. And then, against every instinct screaming at me to keep going, I got out. The diner was empty except for the waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with deep lines on her face. She barely glanced up as I walked in. "Morning," she muttered, flipping a page in her magazine. I slid into a booth at the far end, my back to the wall. The place smelled of coffee and burnt toast, the kind of scent that clung to everything. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do. But before I could, I heard it. The bell above the door jingled, and someone walked in. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I didn't want to see. But I felt it. A presence, moving slowly, deliberately, and then it sat down, across from me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I forced myself to breathe, to act normal, to pretend that maybe, just maybe, this was a regular person. But then I looked up, and I saw me, not a stranger, not a shadow, me, sitting there, smiling, my own face, staring back at me. But wrong. The eyes were too dark, like deep, endless pits. The skin was too smooth, too perfect, like it had been stretched over something that didn't quite understand how human flesh was supposed to work. And the grin, too wide, too knowing. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. It leaned forward, resting its elbows on the table, that awful grin never faltering. And then, in a voice that was almost mine, it whispered, "You can't run from yourself." A hand, asterisk, asterisk, my hand, asterisk, asterisk, reached across the table. I bolted. The chair clattered to the floor as I scrambled backward, knocking into a table. The waitress jerked her head up, startled, but I was already running. Out the door, into the car. The engine roared to life, my foot slamming down on the gas. I didn't look back. I couldn't, because I knew what I'd see. Me, smiling, waiting. I drove faster than I ever had in my life, my hands shaking on the wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how far I went, no matter how many miles I put between myself and that place, I knew the truth. I had left the house. I had left the town, but I hadn't left it because it wasn't the house that was cursed. It was me. And now, it would never let me go. Story 2. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I'd heard stories, sure. Whispers passed between co-workers. The eerie legends retold at bars on stormy nights. But I never put much stock in them. That was before I moved into the house on Blackwood Lane. I'd been looking for a fresh start. A divorce will do that to you, make you desperate to reclaim something that was lost. My ex-wife and I had sold our old home, split the assets, and gone our separate ways. I took what little I had left and started searching for a place of my own. That's when I found it. The house was old, built sometime in the late 1800s. Its exterior warped and weathered by time. It stood at the end of a quiet street, shrouded by towering oaks that cast long shadows over the cracked pavement. The price was suspiciously low, but I didn't ask too many questions. When I first stepped inside, a heavy stillness settled over me. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and something faintly metallic. The realtor, a chipper woman in a cheap blazer, rattled off a list of features: the clawfoot tub, the original hardwood floors, the spacious attic. I barely listened. I signed the papers that afternoon. The first few days were uneventful. The house creaked and groaned like any old place would. The pipes shuddered when I ran the water, and the wind slipped through unseen cracks, howling through the halls. At night, I convinced myself that the sounds outside my bedroom door were just the house settling. Then I met Mrs. Calloway. She lived next door, a frail woman in her 70s with a sharp gaze that never seemed to blink enough. I was unloading boxes when she appeared at the edge of my lawn, her thin hands clasped in front of her. "You bought the house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Guess I got lucky." She didn't smile back. "You be careful in there." Something about the way she said it sent a shiver down my spine. I waited for her to elaborate, but she only stared at the house with an expression I couldn't quite place. Pity, maybe, or fear. "The man before you didn't last long," she murmured. "Ran out in the middle of the night, babbling about voices." A cold unease crept into my stomach. "What kind of voices?" Mrs. Calloway's lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll see." And with that, she turned and shuffled back to her house. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air in my bedroom felt heavy, pressing down on my chest like a damp cloth. I kept hearing noises, small, almost imperceptible sounds, like the distant murmur of conversation. But I was alone. At least, I thought I was. I told myself it was just my imagination. That first night in a new house always feels strange. Unfamiliar walls, different acoustics, a bed that doesn't quite feel like yours yet. It had to be that, but the feeling didn't go away. I woke up groggy, my head pounding as if I hadn't slept at all. The air in the house felt stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I went about my day, unpacking boxes, setting up furniture, trying to make the place feel like home. The unease didn't start creeping in until later. It was little things at first, shadows that seemed too long, stretching unnaturally across the floor when the light should have been hitting them differently. A faint scent of something rotten lingering in the hallway, vanishing before I could trace it. And the noises, soft, almost imperceptible. A creak in the floorboards when I wasn't walking. A whisper just low enough that I couldn't quite make out the words. I checked every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. I told myself old houses make noises. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes shift. The wind plays tricks. It wasn't until that night that I started to doubt my own reasoning. I went to bed around midnight, exhausted from unpacking. The house was silent, aside from the occasional pop of the floorboards. But sometime around 2 a.m., something woke me up. A sound. It took me a second to place it. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the floor above me. The attic. I held my breath, listening. The steps moved in a steady rhythm, like someone was pacing. My heart pounded against my ribs. There was no one else in the house. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, trying to ignore the trembling in my hands. The attic entrance was in the hallway, a pull-down ladder with an old brass handle. I hesitated for a long moment before reaching up and tugging the cord. The ladder creaked as it unfolded. The sound loud in the quiet house. A wave of cold air rolled down from the darkness above. My flashlight cut through the shadows, illuminating old wooden beams and dusty insulation. It was empty. Nothing. No footprints in the dust. No signs that anything or anyone had been there. Still, the unease didn't leave me. I shut the attic and locked my bedroom door that night. But even through the locked door, I still heard them. Slow, dragging footsteps. Not above me this time. Right outside my room. I lay frozen in bed, my breath shallow, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might shake the mattress. The footsteps outside my door were slow, deliberate. They paused for a moment, and in the thick silence that followed, I heard something worse. Breathing. Not mine. Something heavy, ragged, just on the other side of the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. Maybe this was sleep paralysis. Some twisted nightmare my brain had conjured out of stress and exhaustion. But the sound of wood creaking under weight was too real, too tangible. I gripped the flashlight tighter. I had no weapons, no baseball bat, no kitchen knife within reach. The only thing between me and whatever was outside that door was a thin sheet of wood, and a lock that suddenly didn't feel strong enough. Then, a tap, just once. Light, knuckles against the wood. I stopped breathing entirely. I didn't move, didn't answer. Then came another tap, and another, slowly, methodically. The kind of knocking you'd hear when someone wanted to be let in. I forced myself to move, inching toward the edge of the bed. My feet touched the floor, the cold seeping into my skin like ice. I raised the flashlight with one hand and gripped the doorknob with the other. The knocking stopped. I waited, listened, silence. With a deep breath, I twisted the lock and yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. I swept the flashlight across the walls, the floor, the open space beyond. Nothing. The air smelled stale, carrying the faintest scent of something damp, something old. And then I saw them, faint, almost invisible in the dim glow of the flashlight. Footprints, not shoe prints. Bare feet, pressed into the dust of the wooden floor. The trail led from my bedroom door down the hall. But they weren't leading away. They were leading to my door. Something had stood there. I slammed the door shut, locked it again, and backed away until I hit the bed. My pulse roared in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I told myself I had imagined it, that I had been dreaming or half asleep, or that maybe I had tracked in something from outside without noticing. But I didn't believe it. I needed answers. So that afternoon, I went next door. Mrs. Calloway answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for me. She peered at me with those sharp eyes, her gaze lingering on my face a little too long. "You heard it, didn't you?" she asked. I hesitated. Heard what? She exhaled, shaking her head. "You wouldn't be the first." A heavy feeling settled in my stomach. Who lived there before me? Mrs. Calloway glanced past me, toward my house. A man. Didn't last long. barely a month before he ran out of there in the middle of the night. I saw him, barefoot, wild-eyed, muttering about something in the walls. I swallowed hard, and before him, her expression darkened. A woman, older, she used to tell me she heard voices at night, kept finding things in places she swore she didn't put them. Then one morning, she just disappeared, left everything behind. Car still in the driveway, purse on the kitchen counter, just gone. A chill ran through me. Why does no one talk about this? I asked. Mrs. Calloway gave me a look that made my skin crawl. Because talking about it doesn't change anything. I left soon after, but her words stuck with me. That night, I double-checked every lock, left every light on, and crawled into bed with the covers pulled up to my chin. But the house wasn't done with me, because at exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something scratching against the inside of the closet door. And this time, it wasn't just footsteps. This time, something was breathing inside my room. The sound of breathing was so close I could feel it, thick, ragged, like air being pulled through lungs that hadn't worked in years. I couldn't move. My body had locked up, my muscles refusing to obey as I stared at the closet door. The scratching was slow, deliberate, as if something inside was dragging its nails down the wood. Then, asterisk tap, tap, tap asterisk, knuckles against the door. The same knocking as before. A chill rippled down my spine. My mind screamed for me to run, to throw open the door and bolt out of the house, but I was trapped. Frozen between the blankets, my breath caught in my throat. It knows I'm awake. The thought came unbidden, but it was true. Whatever was in there, it knew. I reached for the flashlight on my nightstand with shaking hands. My fingers fumbled over the switch. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then the door creaked open an inch. I sucked in a breath. The gap was pitch black, too dark, as if the closet wasn't just a small space in my room anymore, but a doorway into something much, much worse. I couldn't take it anymore. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged out of bed and aimed the flashlight at the closet. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. The door stood slightly ajar, the inside just as it had been earlier that day. Half unpacked boxes, a few hanging clothes, nothing else. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The breathing, the knocking, the scratching, something had been in there. I ran to the closet and slammed the door shut, shoving a chair in front of it for good measure. My hands were shaking, my pulse erratic. I stood there for a long time listening, waiting. Nothing. Finally, I backed toward the bed, still gripping the flashlight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I was running on fumes. My entire body ached from exhaustion, but there was no way I was staying in that house another night without answers. I started researching. The house had been built in 1903, passed through multiple owners over the decades. Nothing out of the ordinary, at least not at first glance. Then I found something. The original owner, Elias Whitmore. He wasn't just some random homeowner. He had been obsessed with the occult. Newspaper clippings from the 1920s mentioned his name in whispers, hinting at strange gatherings, unusual symbols carved into the foundation of the house, visitors who arrived but never left. And then in 1931, he vanished. No body, no explanation, just gone. The last known tenant before me had filed a police report about things moving on their own, hearing voices, waking up to find scratches on the walls. He left 2 weeks later. My blood ran cold. I had to see for myself. That night, I pushed past my fear and yanked the closet door open again. It was just a closet. I grabbed the flashlight and ran my hand along the inside wall. The wood felt uneven, slightly warped in one section. My heart pounded as I pressed against it. Click, the panel shifted. A hidden compartment. I hesitated before pulling it open. Inside, covered in dust, was an old leather-bound journal. The edges were cracked, the pages yellowed. I opened it. The first entry was dated 1928, and the first words made my stomach drop. Asterisk, the door is open. I cannot close it. Asterisk. I stared at the journal, my fingers trembling as I turned the fragile page. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible, scrawled in a hurried, uneven hand. Asterisk, the door is open. I cannot close it. I have tried everything, the sigils, the salt, the prayers. Nothing works. It watches me now. It knows I am afraid. Asterisk, a chill settled deep in my bones. The door. Was he talking about the closet? I swallowed hard and kept reading. Asterisk, it began with whispers. At first, I thought them the wind, the creaking of the house settling at night. But they grew louder. They knew my name. They pleaded for me to listen. And then, the knocking started. Asterisk, I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach. The knocking, the same slow, deliberate tapping I had heard outside my bedroom door. My pulse thundered in my ears as I read on. Asterisk, I was foolish. I wanted to see. I thought I was strong enough. I opened the door, and now I am not alone. Asterisk, a faint gust of cold air swept through the closet, ruffling the pages. I flinched, spinning around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. Nothing, just the dim glow of my bedside lamp casting long, trembling shadows. I forced myself to turn back to the journal. Asterisk, it moves when I am not looking. I close my eyes, and it inches closer. I hear it breathe, feel it watching. It waits for me to sleep. Asterisk, a shudder crawled down my spine. Asterisk, there is only one way to be free of it. The house must not be lived in. The next fool who enters will inherit this curse. It will wait, as it always has. It will whisper. It will knock. And if they listen, if they open the door, asterisk. The rest of the page was smeared, the ink running like it had been touched with water. Or tears. My breath hitched. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the closet. The door was open, but I hadn't opened it. A deep, guttural breath rasped from the darkness inside. My body locked up. My mind screamed at me to move, to run. But I could only stare as the shadows in the closet seemed to shift. Something was in there, watching me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself as I grabbed the chair and shoved it against the door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely lock it. The air in the room had changed. Thick, heavy. It felt like I was being smothered by an invisible weight, a presence pressing in from all sides. I needed to get out. The journal was still clutched in my hand as I bolted from the room, down the stairs and out the front door. Cold night air slapped me in the face, but I didn't stop running until I reached Mrs. Calloway's house. I banged on the door like a madman. She opened it almost immediately, her eyes widening as she took one look at me. You saw it, didn't you? I could barely catch my breath. The journal, the closet, there's something in there. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked tired. You should have never stayed past the first night, she murmured. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? She exhaled, glancing at my house. It's always been that way. It lets people think it's just a house at first, but then it starts testing you, seeing if you'll listen, if you'll open the door. My grip tightened on the journal. Who was Elias Whitmore? What did he do? Her gaze darkened. He wanted to know what was beyond the veil. He spent years trying to open a door to the other side, and one day he did. The words from the journal echoed in my mind. Asterisk, the door is open. I cannot close it, asterisk. I shook my head. If he's been gone since the 1930s, then what's left in there? She looked me dead in the eyes. Something that wants to leave. A cold chill wrapped around me. Mrs. Calloway, what happens if I don't? She hesitated. Then she said something that made my blood turn to ice. You won't have a choice. I stared at the journal, my fingers trembling, as I turned the fragile page. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible, scrawled in a hurried, uneven hand. Asterisk, the door is open. I cannot close it. I have tried everything, the sigils, the salt, the prayers. Nothing works. It watches me now. It knows I am afraid. Asterisk, a chill settled deep in my bones. The door. Was he talking about the closet? I swallowed hard and kept reading. Asterisk, it began with whispers. At first, I thought them the wind, the creaking of the house settling at night. But they grew louder. They knew my name. They pleaded for me to listen. And then the knocking started. Asterisk, I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach. The knocking, the same slow, deliberate tapping I had heard outside my bedroom door. My pulse thundered in my ears as I read on. Asterisk, I was foolish. I wanted to see. I thought I was strong enough. I opened the door, and now I am not alone. Asterisk, a faint gust of cold air swept through the closet, ruffling the pages. I flinched, spinning around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. Nothing. Just the dim glow of my bedside lamp casting long, trembling shadows. I forced myself to turn back to the journal. Asterisk, it moves when I am not looking. I close my eyes, and it inches closer. I hear it breathe, feel it watching. It waits for me to sleep. Asterisk, a shudder crawled down my spine. Asterisk, there is only one way to be free of it. The house must not be lived in. The next fool who enters will inherit this curse. It will wait, as it always has. It will whisper. It will knock. And if they listen, if they open the door, asterisk, the rest of the page was smeared, the ink running like it had been touched with water, or tears. My breath hitched. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the closet. The door was open, but I hadn't opened it. A deep, guttural breath rasped from the darkness inside. My body locked up. My mind screamed at me to move, to run. But I could only stare as the shadows in the closet seemed to shift. Something was in there, watching me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself as I grabbed a chair and shoved it against the door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely lock it. The air in the room had changed. Thick, heavy. It felt like I was being smothered by an invisible weight, a presence pressing in from all sides. I needed to get out. The journal was still clutched in my hand as I bolted from the room, down the stairs and out the front door. Cold night air slapped me in the face, but I didn't stop running until I reached Mrs. Calloway's house. I banged on the door like a madman. She opened it almost immediately, her eyes widening as she took one look at me. You saw it, didn't you? I could barely catch my breath. The journal, the closet, there's something in there. She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked tired. You should have never stayed past the first night, she murmured. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? She exhaled, glancing at my house. It's always been that way. It lets people think it's just a house at first, but then it starts testing you, seeing if you'll listen, if you'll open the door. My grip tightened on the journal. Who was Elias Whitmore? What did he do? Her gaze darkened. He wanted to know what was beyond the veil. He spent years trying to open a door to the other side. And one day, he did. The words from the journal echoed in my mind. Asterisk, the door is open. I cannot close it, asterisk. I shook my head. If he's been gone since the 1930s, then what's left in there? She looked me dead in the eyes. Something that wants to leave. A cold chill wrapped around me. Mrs. Calloway, what happens if I don't? She hesitated. Then she said something that made my blood turn to ice. You won't have a choice. Mrs. Calloway's words echoed in my mind as I stood there, gripping the journal like a lifeline. Asterisk, you won't have a choice. Asterisk, the cold night air pressed against my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was racing. The thing in the house, whatever Whitmore had let in, It wasn't just some ghost. It wasn't a memory or a shadow. It was something alive in a way that defied reason. Something that waited. And now, it was waiting for me. I swallowed hard. Mrs. Calloway, how do I stop it? She sighed, folding her arms. You don't. No one ever has. That house is hungry, and once it sets its sights on you, it won't let go. A sharp pang of fear clenched my stomach. Then what do? You leave, she said simply. While you still can. I wanted to argue, tell her I wasn't going to let a house chase me away. But the truth was, I didn't want to stay. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from that place as possible. But then a terrible thought struck me. What if it follows me? Mrs. Calloway's expression darkened. It won't, she said. But that doesn't mean it'll let you go easy. A long silence stretched between us. The wind rustled through the trees, a whispering sound that set my nerves on edge. Then, she took a step back and nodded toward her door. You can stay here for the night. But if I were you, I'd be packed and gone by morning. I hesitated, and then, from the direction of my house, asterisk tap, 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 asterisk. That same deliberate knocking, but not on the front door. This time, it was on the window. My stomach dropped. The lights were off in my house. There was no reason for a shadow to be standing behind the glass. And yet, I saw it. A dark, human-shaped figure, motionless, waiting. I turned back to Mrs. Calloway, my throat tight. I think I made a mistake. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. I wasn't safe. Not even here. I barely slept. Mrs. Calloway let me use her spare room, but the walls were thin and every creak of the old house made my heart race. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I jolted awake to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath listening. Then, asterisk tap, 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 asterisk. I squeezed my eyes shut. It knew where I was. It was looking for me. I pressed my back against the headboard, forcing myself to stay still, to keep my breathing quiet. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, that my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. But then, something even worse happened. The doorknob turned. The metal rattled slightly as if something was testing it, seeing if it would open. I gripped the blankets, frozen in place. The door was locked. It wouldn't get in. Then the whisper came, low, right on the other side of the door. Asterisk, you opened it. Asterisk. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. The whisper was familiar, too familiar. It was my own voice. I didn't sleep after that. At dawn I left. I didn't pack. I didn't go back inside my house. I just grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove. I didn't stop until I was hours away. Pulling into a cheap motel on the outskirts of some town I didn't even bother to learn the name of. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I sat in the dim motel room, the journal still clutched in my hands. The leather was warm now, like it had absorbed the heat of my palms. The door was open. Elias Whitmore had written those words nearly a century ago, and now I knew the truth. It was still open. I wasn't the first person to be haunted by that house, and I wouldn't be the last. As I lay down on the stiff motel bed, exhausted but unable to sleep, a terrible realization crept into my mind. I had left, but that didn't mean it was over. And then, asterisk tap, 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 asterisk, from the motel window. The fear I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever known, because I had been so sure that I had left it behind. But I was wrong, so very wrong. The tapping continued, steady, unhurried. Asterisk tap, 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 asterisk. I lay frozen in the motel bed, my breath caught in my throat. The sound wasn't coming from the door. It was at the window. I forced myself to move, inching my head just slightly toward the glass. The curtains were thin, the dim glow of the motel's parking lot lights filtering through, and behind them, a shadow, tall, motionless, waiting. A tremor ran down my spine. I wanted to believe it was just some late-night traveler passing by, someone stopping at the wrong window. But deep down, I knew better. It had followed me. My body screamed at me to run, but my limbs felt leaden, locked in place by some invisible force. I reached for my phone, my fingers clumsy with fear, but as soon as I touched it, the tapping stopped. Silence, and then the whisper, asterisk, you left the door open, asterisk. My blood turned to ice. I shot up from the bed, nearly tripping over my own feet as I stumbled away from the window. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The whisper had been right behind the glass. I didn't dare pull the curtain aside. Instead, I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the damn journal, the thing that had led me to this nightmare in the first place. I bolted for the door, flinging it open into the cold night air. The parking lot was empty. No people, no footsteps. And when I turned back to my window, nothing, no shadow, no sign that anything had ever been there. I didn't wait. I jumped into my car, fumbling to start the engine, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get the key into the ignition. The headlights flared to life, cutting through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. I sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I drove for hours. The sun was beginning to rise by the time I pulled over at a deserted rest stop, my body racked with exhaustion. I slumped forward, gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breath. I had escaped the house, but the fear still clung to me like a second skin. I reached for the journal, flipping it open to the last entry. The ink was smudged, the words uneven, as if they had been written in a rush. Asterisk, it doesn't matter how far you go. Once you open the door, it never really closes. Asterisk, a cold weight settled in my stomach. I ran a hand down my face, my fingers trembling. I had left that house, but had I really escaped? I leaned back against the car's seat, staring out at the empty road stretching ahead of me. The morning was quiet, the world still. For the first time in what felt like days, there was no tapping, no whispers, just silence. Maybe, just maybe, it was over. I let out a shaky breath, allowing my eyes to close for just a moment. And then, asterisk tap, 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 asterisk, right beside my ear. I screamed, jerking forward so fast, I nearly hit my head on the steering wheel. My breath came in short, panic bursts as I whipped around. Nothing. The car was empty. The windows were fogged from my own panic breath. I sat there, shaking, my hands clutching the steering wheel like a lifeline. It had followed me, and now it was inside. I wasn't running from the house anymore. I was running from something that would never leave me. And in that moment, as I sat in the dim glow of the early morning light, I realized the terrible truth. I would never be alone again.